Woohoo!
Last week, we started a series on capitalism.
Yes.
We came to the conclusion that some of the critiques of capitalism lack a little nuance. This week, I want to discuss some ways that capitalism is failing us. Let's talk about a couple of reasons why we discuss that a blanket condemnation of capitalism may not be the full story. What role does freedom play in capitalism?
Capitalism is all about the free market. It's about having the ability to make money, to work the job that you want for the hours that you want, to make the amount you want, and to just spend your money on whatever you want.
Right, and I think that throughout our conversations, we've discovered that freedom is an important value across all political spectrums.
Yes.
True? I think we also saw that although people talk about the power of ownership in capitalism, there are actually two competing powers in capitalism that are equal, if not more powerful. Any idea what those two powers might be?
The force of labor and the consumers.
So talk to me about labor's power in capitalism.
Labor gets everything done. If you own like a company, for example, you have to definitely have the control over people underneath you, because you control like the hours that they work and how they get paid and like what they produce. Those people are ultimately the ones that are producing what they're producing, and then the ones that are making the money. So if they all of a sudden just suddenly decide to stop one day, then there would be no more power for the company because the company would lose all its workers.
Right, and that's inherent to capitalism.
Yes.
It's not a tack on to capitalism. That's part of being a free market, right?
Yes.
You get to work there if you want to, and if you don't have to. Talk to me about the consumer.
Well, the consumer is what all these companies are trying to target. It's the reason why everyone spends so much on advertising, is because it doesn't matter how many products you have or how good those products are if no one wants to buy them. You can have the supply, but you need the demand, and the consumers completely control that. If everyone suddenly decided to stop buying something, then the company would really quickly go out of business.
Right, so ultimately in capitalism, the ultimate decider of what gets produced is the consumer.
Yes.
So in spite of these things that we discussed last week, where capitalism is really just a free market system that has inherent to it power structures that compete with ownership, that being labor and consumers, there is a growing sentiment, I think I can say, in America and possibly worldwide, that capitalism is failing us.
Yes.
What are some of those failures?
The biggest failure of capitalism right now is people are unable to work appropriate hours, getting treated well, and still be able to survive on the money that capitalism awards them.
Would you say that a major complaint against capitalism is that it doesn't distribute the rewards of our collective efforts fairly?
Yes.
Is this true?
The signs I can see right now is that people are working and those same people are dying. When you look at the company and its structures and like what's being awarded right now, when you look at like the growing cost of living and the disparity between minimum wage and a real living wage, the amount of hours that people are being working and how they're being treated and the amount of money they're getting, a reward for it, and then the amount of stuff that money can get from them, it seems like on every level of existing as a person, capitalism is not functioning properly to reward you, especially when you see that the people on top of the company, the people with the ownership who under capitalism supposedly would be competing with the labor and the consumers, they have more money and more power than anyone, and it doesn't seem like anyone's really able to fight back against them. And they undoubtedly have more money than the work that they have done in their lifetimes, no matter how much work they have done, which for some is a lot and some is not that much. No matter how much work they've done, it is multiplied by such a horrendous factor that they could work 1,000 lifetimes, the same amount, harder than anyone else on Earth has been working for 24 hours a day, and still not even reach percentage of what they have obtained in this one.
I want to make a distinction that I think is muddled in a lot of internet conversation about this. There is ownership in companies, and then there's leadership. Can you explain that distinction?
In these sort of like public companies where we're selling like stocks and shares of essentially like parts of the company, then a lot of people can have ownership of parts of the company and can thus have some sort of power over the company. But then there's generally one and like a board of leaders that actually control the decisions that are going on in the company.
Right, and just to clarify this, the board of directors in a corporate structure is appointed by ownership to represent ownership's interests.
Yeah.
They have no decision really on the day-to-day operations of the company.
Yes.
Leadership, as I'm discussing it, is management. Your C-level suite, right? CEOs, whatever else. And they're just employees. They may have some ownership interest, but in that role, they're employees.
Right.
But they're extremely powerful employees.
Yes.
CEO pay compared to an average worker's pay is at historical highs. And as to ownership versus labor, inequality between the highest earners and the lowest earners in America is also at a historical high. So I think that the data supports this, right? That there's something going on that is not typical, and it's clearly causing pain.
Yes.
For people who aren't at the top, whether that be ownership or management. So, true. Like statistically true. There's something going on. If the problem is that the rewards of a company's collective efforts aren't being shared fairly, who's in charge of deciding how the profits of the company get divided between the owners, management, and labor?
The ones in the leadership positions.
Management?
Yeah, well, they control what's going on in the company. They lead. So, yeah, they would definitely have a say in it. And then as well, also the owners of the company, people that have ownership of the company, they would also be able to step in and decide how the money is getting distributed.
If a CEO decided to pay themselves unfairly, ownership and labor should both be concerned about that.
Yes.
Right? And if ownership isn't paying labor enough, whether that be management or traditional labor, I think they would have concerns to the company or to the ownership.
Yes.
So let's talk about management first. Do you think that management currently is setting the rules to maximize their rewards at the expense of labor?
Of course they are.
Is that surprising?
No. When you get to the top of a company and you are in a leadership position at that company, you get there by prioritizing the profits, how to make the company function best. And by learning how to prioritize profits, it makes sense that you would prioritize those over the people of the company. It also makes sense that you would learn how to be more selfish while climbing through the ladders and climbing through the people of the company. So it's not really surprising that the people at the top of the company don't pay the people below them in order to prioritize both the profits of the company and themselves.
So I think that you said two things, and one of them seems to make sense. And I want to maybe question the other. Management is rewarded by ownership, ultimately, for creating profits.
Yes.
And therefore, management is going to maximize profits at the expense of labor, you would say, because ownership doesn't care about labor.
Yeah. And so the companies are working to maintain the amount of money, the bare minimum of money that will get people coming and staying at the company while still not paying them an amount that might be more fair.
In that matrix between ownership, management, and labor, that management is incentivized to maximize profit, who would you say is at fault?
Management.
But isn't management just doing what ownership requests or demands of them?
Yeah, I guess.
Aren't they ultimately responsible to ownership?
Yeah.
Would you agree that on the profit motive being the highest motive in capitalism, it's based off of ownership's self-interest.
Yes.
Is that surprising?
No.
So in a free market, you would expect that.
Yes.
And I guess you could also say, though, that some of the blame would be on management,
Yeah.
right? Because, as a manager, you work with these people,
Yeah.
right? I mean, these are your coworkers.
Yeah.
And it seems like out of some sort of human compassion or care or whatever, you want to look out for them.
Yeah.
If you're a good leader.
And obviously, based on the CEO's salaries that we've seen, the management is actually definitely profiting off of this sort of exploitative method of control.
Right, for sure. And, one way that they've done that is management has aligned themselves with ownership by creating compensation packages that are dependent on stock.
Yeah.
Particularly for them. Labor gets paid cash, management gets paid cash and stock. So because they're becoming owners of the company, it's natural that they would align with ownership, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and leadership and ownership are kind of intertwined in this way. There definitely is a difference between like the primary owner of the company and the manager who is also an employee of the company. But the line isn't as clearly drawn as it is in like these like theoretical situations.
It's totally true in American capitalism in particular. And you can see how it happened though. Ownership, that is, stockholders or, individual owners want their leadership to run the company in their best interests.
Yeah.
And therefore, they're like, yeah, absolutely, let's pay these guys in stock so they're aligned just like we are.
Yeah.
And I'll also say just briefly that in America, management, particularly in public companies, is really ultimately in control. Theoretically, board of directors control management, but in general, in American capitalism, boards are extremely weak. Typically, the chairman of the board is the CEO. So management ultimately is the one making these decisions. In a free market, theoretically, what's the check on management or ownership unfairly distributing the rewards of collective effort?
Labor.
How so?
Theoretically, if management and ownership are unfairly distributing the wealth of the company, the labor can all just be like, hey, no, that's bad. I'm not working for a place that's not paying me fairly. And they can just all leave and no one can work at that company until the ownership and the management are like, oh, wait, we actually need labor for this company to run properly. So please come back. And then they agree to pay it fairly.
Well, and I think that labor has two options, actually. One is they can individually choose to leave that company. And secondly, they can join together.
Yeah. And then collectively go on strike.
And demand more fair compensation. But somehow it seems that those two options are not working right now.
No.
What's hindering labor's power in this way?
Labor is in a really difficult situation as an individual here. Because labor is in a difficult position as an individual here because they don't have that much bargaining power. Because the value of one person to a company is not as much as the entire group of people working for a company. So in general, a worker can be replaced easily enough, and then that person is in that difficult position of trying to find a new job to pay the bills when a lot of the companies seem to be in the same position of prioritizing profit. So they need ultimately to decide, is it worth it to leave when I could end up worse as I am? Or should I kind of just stay in the situation where maybe I'm not thriving, but I am technically still surviving? Because for this one worker, this is not a theoretical decision. This is the difference between life and death.
So as someone who's been on the side of ownership and management most of my life, I buy that to some degree, although the risks for an owner or management to losing a good employee are extremely high. If every company is structured in a similar way where there's ownership, management, and labor, and ownership and management in all of these companies are aligned in trying to maximize profits at the expense of labor, that kind of limits your options as a laborer.
Yeah. Capitalism in itself means that they need to prioritize profit. So that means that although they're not necessarily doing this big plan together, they don't have to, because they're in the same mindset. And the same mindset is, I need to prioritize profit, and if treating my employees better means that I can get better profit, then of course they're going to do that. But if everyone decided to prioritize profit above their employees, then those employees
Have no choice.
have no choice.
So, what's the other choice?
Join together and negotiate as a group.
Collective action.
Collective action.
That kind of changes the balance of power a little bit.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
If that entire group of labor joins together and decides to tell a company, hey, you need to treat us better or we're all going to stop working, then suddenly that one worker isn't so easy to replace anymore because it's joined by these 1,000 other workers that you also need to replace.
One of the inherent problems with that, and a problem that I think that labor faces, is that on some level, labor is not in leadership for a reason. Leaders are put in leadership positions because that's what they're good at. Organization requires leadership.
It also, there's sort of this difference though, in that doing collective action as a group of employees requires a large amount of selflessness, while becoming a leader in a company requires a larger amount of selfishness.
Do you think that the world is more globalized now than it was 50 years ago?
Yeah. One impact that could have on the force of collective labor is that there is, for one, just more labor generally. There's more people that we can connect with, and especially when we're talking about positions that might be able to be done remotely. And then there's also more people that are used to being treated worse.
All of our transportation technology is better. All of our communications technology is better. All of our organizational technology is better. All of our logistics. I mean, it's a lot harder to have a global supply chain when everyone's on telephones and typewriters
Yeah.
than it is in the age of the internet. Now, labor faces significant and real competition. And if we take the United Auto Workers, for example, this is a real problem. Because GM can say, you know what, we're done with Detroit. We're building all of our cars in China, in Mexico, right? So that, globalization has played a real role in reducing labor's ability to organize because there's disparity in the world.
Yeah.
There's income disparity in the world. And companies having the ability to technologically more easily move their manufacturing around the world can take advantage of that.
Yeah. And the only way to appropriately combat the problem would be to equalize the distribution of wealth globally.
Right, exactly. Which I think, ultimately is slowly kind of happening, but for Americans, that means incomes are going to go down. Well, so we've already hinted on another change over the past 50 years that creates competition for labor, and that's technology.
I think I've said before in a video, if we had a perfect world, then the implementation of technology into the workplace in order to make labor more efficient, it would result in eventually there not needing to be many laborers at all, and then everyone could just bet more money without working as hard, and then you could win the world. But how it actually impacts it is that laborers are getting replaced by these machines who can do the work more efficiently and for more hours and without as much complaining about not getting paid fairly. And then those laborers are out of a job while these robots are in with the job. And then the leadership and ownership positions of a company are able to maximize profits without the intervention of labor at all.
There's some replacement of labor by technology, but more importantly is what you said initially, is that technology makes each individual laborer way more productive.
Automation and the assistance of technology doesn't need to be bad at all, and can instead be a useful tool and can even end up with better lives for everyone. But when technology is being implemented under capitalism, it's going to end up worse for the laborers.
If there's any one thing that is a real insurmountable problem for the labor movement right now, it's this: that labor can be and has been replaced by technology, and technology doesn't care. So I see this as a systemic issue that's creating an imbalance in what was traditionally a more balanced system in capitalism.
Yeah.
Between labor and ownership.
This is not purely a technological problem. This is a problem with capitalism.
Well, for sure. And so this is where we begin to talk about what we need to put on top of capitalism, or to balance capitalism in order to make it fair. We're talking about regulation, laws, collective action through democracy. Yeah. There has to be some other force in our economic system to counterbalance some of these imbalances that normally or traditionally were able to balance themselves out a little bit.
Yeah.
And what we're going to talk about next week in detail is exactly the conundrum that you stated. If productivity has increased 100-fold over the past 50 years, why aren't we working 100 times less?
Yeah. We hope that you enjoyed that video, and if you did, please consider checking out the next one in the series.
Or some of our other series on philosophy and life.
We upload videos every Friday, so don't forget to like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. See you next week.